Hello, hello. Good.
Oh, now mine isn't working.
That's so funny. Yesterday, my camera was off, but now his is. Happy Saturday. Hope you guys are having a wonderful day. We certainly are. We drove down to the beach today, did a little exploring. It was very, very fun.
Where we go? Laguna Beach?
Yes, we went to Laguna Beach and
Lovely.
Newport Beach. Just kind of drove down and walked in the sand. And it was kind of a quick trip. It wasn't like a spend the day at the beach. It was just kind of a driving tour.
You gotta go scope it out.
Yeah, but it was really, really lovely. And we're back today for Self-Healing Saturday. It has been a few weeks, I think, since we've done a Self-Healing Saturday, since we've been traveling. So we wanted to talk today about something that has come up in a few different questions, messages that I've gotten from people, and messages in the G&M Self-Healing group. And it's just an interesting thing because it's so important that you pay attention to who you're paying attention to, and you pay attention to who you're listening to, because fear is contagious. And when you are healing, when you are in a healing phase, when you are using the things that you're learning through German New Medicine to, optimize your healing and to get, to resolve your conflicts, to get into the healing phase and then to stay in the healing phase, the people you're surrounded with have a huge, huge influence on really, what goes on with your body, because fear and panic is the number one thing that can worsen any type of conflict active phase. If that's not going to work, I guess we can just do this one today.
Well, yeah, just wait a minute, and then maybe I'll just put it on.
Okay. So yeah, we wanted to talk about, how can you protect yourself from the fears of other people, especially people who aren't really on board with GNM or maybe don't understand what it is you're choosing to do, whether it's, holistic care, whether you're denying certain, conventional medical things, even if you're doing conventional medical things, but they're still dumping tons of fear and, cautioning you and telling, really enhancing your worry instead of helping to ease your worries and fears, and kind of how to interact with those people in ways to protect your energy.
Yeah, so the interesting thing for me, and have you had this experience? I know this is something this very often, I think in relationships, we kind of, we can spiral upward or spiral downward kind of in response to each other. And that's been a really good example of kind of like a negative harmonizing that has existed in our relationship before, where like I'll feel like everything's great, everything's okay, everything's going well, everything's advancing, everything's improving, everything's getting better financially in terms of our business, in terms of just life in general. And then if I kind of come up in contact, or if I notice something about you or something about your demeanor that seems to suggest things aren't that great, it kind of knocks you off kilter. Oh, the interesting thing about it is that when I find out about that stuff, hang on one second. When I notice that you're feeling that way, there's a part of me that wants to know more about it. I want to know, what's going on? What's wrong? What are you thinking about? What are you worried about? And it's almost as if there's a part of me unconsciously that's wanting to worry about that thing too. And I think recognizing that part is like, it's been a huge thing for me, like recognizing that tendency. And then also, when it comes to taking your cues from other people, like when to be afraid, like let's say, what you said too is really good about whether it's conventional medicine, whether, no matter what you're doing, if you're doing something alternative or unusual or not, people are just sometimes really freaked out. Sometimes people's like default setting, is like they're simmering just below being really upset. They have kind of like a percolating sort of like anxiety, or they're really ready because they know something's going to go wrong. They know something's not going to work out. They know something bad is going to happen. And so since they know they're going to go up to their threshold anyway, they figure they might as well just kind of hang out there to be ready when it happens. And if you're dealing with, especially if you're dealing with a health crisis or a health challenge of some kind, I think being around people, and it's interesting too, so a lot of people just carry the pattern of focusing on what they do not want. For a lot of people, that's just their default setting. It doesn't matter if they're worried about being late to the post office and not getting to mail a letter, or whether they're worried about losing their spouse or their parent or their child or a friend or family member, someone who's very important to them. Obviously, the degree is different, but the basic pattern of focusing for a lot of people, it's don't want, don't want, don't want. What can go wrong? And, depending on what the content is, if we're talking about like losing someone who's very important to you, obviously, the pattern of focusing on what you do not want is more overtly destructive, more overtly unresourceful. because the degree of negative emotion that it evokes from within you and that it causes to kind of manifest through your behaviors is greater. You know, if I'm worried about, if I'm focusing on what I don't want with regard to, you know, not getting to the post office on time, maybe I'm a little snippy, maybe I'm a little bit, you know, kind of on edge, maybe I'm a little irritable. If I'm focusing on what I don't want with regard to the health or well-being of a close family member, it's going to be the same pattern is going to magnify in a much more kind of strong way. Now, if you're the person, though, who's having the health challenge, if you're the person that your friends or family members are worried about, then you've got kind of your own challenge because you're doing your best to deal with your situation. And then on top of that, and so you wake up, you've got your own internal dialogue, you've got your own doubts, you've got your own concerns, you've got your own worries, you've got your own maybe less than resourceful patterns of focusing to deal with. And then, like, let's say you get those things under control, and then you go downstairs and you meet your other family members, or then you get a phone call or a text or whatever. And obviously they're worried, and it's almost like something inside says, "Oh God, they're worried too. Geez, maybe I was kidding myself. Maybe I should be really worried about this stuff." And I think that learning to recognize that, like, even if the content is sensitive, which is to say, like, even if we're dealing with like life and death stuff here, even if this is your well-being is at stake, the fact that people are really fearful, it just means they're focusing on what they don't want. That's all it means. So to the degree that I give my attention to what I don't want, I feel bad. To the degree that I focus on possibilities or outcomes or assign meanings that don't serve me, I feel bad. Now, how bad I feel relates to how intensely I'm focusing and also what the content or the specific subject matter is. But the basic reality that if you come into contact with someone who's freaked out about your health condition, the reason that they're freaked out is not that you are going to die necessarily. It doesn't mean that. It doesn't mean that you can't overcome this thing. It means that they are unconsciously and unintentionally focusing their mind in a way that really isn't serving them. And this is, for me, for a really long time, my whole thing was, if I came across somebody, especially Melissa, and I noticed that she was focusing her mind in a way that wasn't serving her, that, for me, fulfilled some unconscious criteria that I had for me to then begin mirroring her and also focusing my mind in a way that didn't serve me. Now, of course, I mean, that's not really but see, the thing is, if I do that, I get caught up in that experience. I start to worry. I start to fear. If I'm not aware of where that's coming from, if I'm not conscious of the fact that I'm not feeling nervous and anxious and afraid because my, deterioration is inevitable, I'm feeling worried and afraid and anxious because I'm not really tending to what's going on inside my head, because I'm allowing my focus to be dictated or to be influenced by external factors like other people and what they're focusing on. And they may or may not be focusing in a way that's really that resourceful. And I think that just owning that and learning to recognize that doesn't mean it's your fault that you're worried. It just means that if you find yourself like neck deep in intense anxiety, if you trace back and find out where that anxiety is coming from, and it comes down to something basic like, oh, you know what? I wasn't really watching what I was thinking about, and I started to think about what I did not want, and then I started to feel bad. So what does it mean that I'm feeling so anxious right now? What does it mean that I got knocked out of that high-flying place of hope and optimism? Well, it means that I allowed my focus to be derailed. Doesn't mean that the things that you're hoping for aren't possible or aren't true. It just means that something happened and you unconsciously, unintentionally allowed that thing to sort of knock you into a new state of consciousness. And now you're feeling from, you're thinking from, you're experiencing from that state of consciousness that you don't necessarily want to be in. That then gives you freedom, so that you can then go to the place where you want to go. Because for a really long time, it's like if I got worried, I felt like I almost needed to stay in the worried zone because I assumed there was some reason I was there. Well, I didn't go here for no reason. And if I'm worried, and especially if they're worried, probably there's a very good reason for me to be worried. Now when you know that that reason just has to do with what you are conscious of being, what you're focusing on, what you're paying attention to, you're not beholden to stay in that state anymore. You can just, when you notice that you're in a state that you don't want to be in, you just move and go into another state. It's like houses in a room. If I notice that I'm in a room in my house that I don't want to be, I don't say, gosh, well, I guess I came here for some reason, so I better stay here for the next 12 hours. I just identify the room I would rather occupy instead, move to that place, think and feel and behave from that place instead. I think there's just immense freedom that comes with that.
Yeah, and I think recognizing just that the perspective of the other person and their filters and the point from which they're seeing the world, it makes sense for them based on their own perception to worry. It's kind of an idea I just had about it is like, if if there is like a fire in the area, and this family member hears about this fire, and they're just freaking out, and they're like really urging you to to do all these desperate things to you have to get out of there because there's this terrible fire, but that it's a controlled burn. That it's planned, it's programmed, it's a controlled burn. It's completely under control, like it's being directed. This is purposeful, this burn that's going on, but the person's like, no, I heard that it's this, and I heard that it's going to get out of control, and you have got to get out of there. And that's like the difference between someone who understands GNM and understands what their symptoms mean versus someone who's coming from like the conventional medicine perspective, and they think that the symptoms are a sign that things are getting worse, things are really bad. And so it's not that their fear, it's just misguided. It's just based on their perception of the situation. And so that's where the greater understanding helps overcome all fear. When you understand why your body's doing what it's doing when it makes sense, you can guide and navigate based on that, and you don't make decisions out of fear. You make them out of rational, conscious judgment. And so does that mean sometimes you may need to go to the hospital? Yeah, and you do that with a level head. It's never panicking and rushing and freaking out. It's never going to serve you best. And that's the thing, is like, it's a natural response. It's very natural to respond with like, freak out mode, fight or flight, but it's never going to serve you best, especially when you understand GNM, especially when you understand that when somebody gets in your ear and you just kind of like, you don't immediately like redirect conversations, get out of conversations, when you kind of like let it simmer, because sometimes it's hard. You love your family, and you they want to help you, and you don't want to completely disregard them. You need them. You really do. You need that support system. You need people close to you, and if the people who are closest to you aren't understanding what you're choosing to do, sometimes it's like, well, some contact with someone who cares is better than no contact, feeling all alone. But if you kind of let them get in and let them really kind of plant some seeds of fear and doubt within you, that fear, that panic, that can cause increased water retention, and then that causes increased swelling. And so it's just basically to remember that fear and panic and worry is never the best answer. So whatever it is that you're like mulling about or concerned about or thinking about, try to find an answer, try to find a reason, try to find an explanation from someone, or hire a coach or something to help you like make sense out of what is going on, so that you can kind of navigate from that place of like level-headedness. I'm gonna do this thing. I realize that I maybe was in a state of conflict activity for a really long time. I realize I've got a lot of healing to navigate now, but I want to do it from the place of, I know that I'm okay. I know my body knows what it's doing. Sometimes I don't know all of the things or why it's doing what it's doing, but I'm going to seek out answers that will put me at ease and at peace. And I understand there's going to be pain, but like when you come, you kind of just like, you go up a level, you go out a level, and you see it from a new perspective. And like that peace, that kind of groundedness in whatever's going on is such a powerful part of healing.
I think the thing too for me is like recognizing, becoming sensitive to these movements of consciousness, noticing, watching those meanings. You know what I'm saying? Watching those meanings, because if, like you said, like if a person's experiencing a lot of pain, if a person has a sense that they need to go to the hospital or something like that, and a lot of people will resist that because they say, oh man, you know what, if I go to the hospital, that means that this is serious. That means that it must be really bad. And it's like, well, not if you don't put that meaning onto it. If you're conscious of that meaning, you'll assign meanings that serve you. If you're not conscious of what you're doing, if you're not conscious of these movements of consciousness, of what you're doing inside your head, inside your mind, then it's possible to make movements that don't really serve you, to kind of be clunky in it. And I think one of the things too is recognizing that, like, getting out of this sort of an excuse-making mode or an excuse-grasping mode where it's like there are external facts of the matter that make it impossible for me to really do the things that I know would be good for me to do. For me, it was tremendously liberating to recognize that there were no facts of the matter that were unwork-withable, right? That everything is work-withable, everything is figure-outable, everything, there's a way to respond resourcefully to it. Now, some stuff, it's trickier than others, and I think letting that be okay is super important, right? Because this is interesting. So there's something that's going on in your life. that you may have difficulty responding resourcefully to. That's a situation. You see what I'm saying? That something is a situation. Maybe it's a health concern, maybe it's a financial thing, maybe it's a relationship thing, maybe it's a self-concept thing, whatever. There's something that you're having a difficult time thinking of, how could I respond resourcefully to that? It's important to recognize, now this is where you become very powerful, that whole thing itself, that situation and your inability to respond resourcefully to it, that itself comprises another situation. So maybe I can't respond resourcefully to this thing that's going on right now. I can't figure out how. How resourcefully can I respond to the fact that in this moment I can't find a way to respond more resourcefully to this situation than I can? If you can respond resourcefully to that, if you can accept that, if you can let that be okay, if you can forgive that, you start this kind of momentum going. And another thing too is, like, there's just so many meanings that are just spewing out of our mind all the time. It's hard to keep up with them. If I can't figure out a way to think a thought that feels good about my health right now, does that mean that there's not a good feeling thought to think? Does it mean that my situation is just so dire, it's just so bad, it's just so irretrievable, or so, I can't, so unfixable that there is no positive thought? Or is it the fact that I'm just not in a state of consciousness that allows me right here and right now to access a thought that would feel good? How okay can you let that be? It's really not so bad to not know what to do when you don't assume that not knowing what to do means that there isn't something that you could do, or that you won't ever find something to do. And it's that flexibility. This is these movements of consciousness that are so important, that if you're in a certain state of mind, you have access to certain resources. If I'm in this room, I've got access to certain things that are in this room. There's a computer over here, there's a little stick that I use for exercises, there's some dog toys over here. I, in this room, do not have access to stuff that's in the kitchen. Now, if I go to the kitchen, I then have access to things that are in the kitchen. In a given state of consciousness, you have access to the things that you can think of, that you can come up with, that you can accept, that you can kind of get a feel for, that you can get into, that you can get behind, that you can get your hands around, so on and so forth, things that make sense to you from that state of consciousness. There are other resources to which you do not have access when you are in the state of consciousness that you're in right now. Can you move rooms? Can you move to a different state of consciousness? Can you allow yourself to go to that different place? There's a coffee pot down there in the kitchen. I can't reach it from here. I know it's there. You see what I mean? Now, if I was in this room and I said, I don't see a coffee pot, I'm reached around, I can't, there must not be, there is no coffee pot extant. There is not one in this universe. I can't get to one. I would feel probably pretty futile. I would feel frustrated. I would feel like I wanted to give up. If I know that even though I can't see it, even though I can't touch it, even though I have no evidence that there's a coffee pot that exists in this room, I know that if I change rooms, all of a sudden it'll be there, plain as day. I can see it, I can feel it, I can hear it if I knock into it, I can taste it if I want to. It's stainless steel, I don't know why I would want to do that. But the point is, I can interact with this thing. And I think if you're looking for hope, if you're looking for reassurance, if you're looking for empowerment, if you're looking for actual physical changes in your body, all of that stuff exists. It just might not be in the room that you're in. It may not be in the state of consciousness that you're in. And if you knew it were out there somewhere, if you knew that all the things that you wanted, all the things that you needed, if you were absolutely convinced that those things existed, how many rooms would you be willing to visit before you just said, well, to hell with it, this is too much trouble, I'm going to give up? You would never give up because you knew that those things were there. Responding resourcefully, it's not about being motivated or about not being lazy. It's just about being convinced that it's there. And when you're convinced that it's there, you go to that place. And when you go to that place, you really find what you're looking for. It's kind of a weird way of thinking, but it beats the hell out of mirroring your husband or your wife or your sister or your brother or your parents or your children or whoever's worried about you and who can't imagine better for you than they're capable of imagining in a given moment in time. Don't let them be the glass ceiling for what's possible for you, because they're doing the best that they can with the resources that are available to them right here and right now. From the state of consciousness from which they are operating, they can't do any better than they are. Let that be okay, but don't stay in that room with them. Oh God, everyone's down in the basement. Everyone's down in the basement. I better go down in the basement too. It's not a smart thing to do. We have an intuitive understanding of this stuff when it comes to people who are under the influence of alcohol. You don't want that person driving, and you surely don't want that person driving a van full of family members. You know what I'm saying? But when it comes to worry, or when it comes to concern, or all the things that might go wrong, very often the dominant personality is the personality that's operating from the least resourceful state of consciousness. It's the person who's most worried about, your health, or most worried about the finances. That person, because they're so emotionally charged tends to exert an influence over everyone else, unless everyone else is conscious. Now, if we're conscious, you know what I'm saying? And that's the thing, to the degree, I used to look at Melissa, and if she was a 2 out of 10 freaked out about something, I'd say, 2 out of 10, that's not so bad. If she was 10 out of 10 freaked out, I would start to say, man, maybe there's something to this, right? She would persuade me by sheer force of emotion, because she was 10 out of 10 convinced about something that was 10 out of 10 unresourceful. I was only 4 out of 10 convinced about something that was 5 out of 10 resourceful, and she won because she was stronger. Now, if I notice that she's feeling some way that doesn't really seem to be serving her, she's operating from a state of consciousness that's not that great, the stronger she is kind of emotionally charged with that, the more I say, I'm not going over there. You know what I'm saying? I'm going to stay where I am. In fact, I'm not even going to try to convince her to come over here, because I know she's operating from a place in this moment. And she does this with me too. She did this with me yesterday. It just a switching of those criteria. This is what it is to be becoming conscious. This is what it is to be becoming empowered. Awareness, responsibility, this conscious choice, this ability to really tap into your personal power, to be able to come into contact with somebody who who's not operating from a state that will allow them to see you in possession of the things that you want, or achieving the health outcome or the resolution that you want, to come into contact with that person and to not let that person derail you, or maybe better to say, to not let yourself be derailed by the fact that they are where they are. You just go where you want to go. And you wait for them to challenge next week. The Every Better Life course, all about awareness. I mean, we use different words, but we're always talking about the same thing. Because literally, when you add this to the equation of you, like when you become aware of your own awareness, when you become conscious of your own consciousness, you start paying attention to what that consciousness is doing. You start paying attention to what you are conscious of being, to what you are aware of being. And when you start noticing that, what you are conscious of being starts to improve. It starts to become stronger, it starts to become healthier, it starts to become wealthier, it starts to become more capable. And as soon as you become conscious of being those things, you really become those things. Everything about your reality, including, your friends and family members, they start to mirror that. Do you know what I'm saying? Like when you become conscious of being the person that you really want to be, you really start to evoke from everything in your reality evidence that you are in fact that which you became conscious of being in advance of that evidence being sort of manifested in your experience. And it's just a cool inversion.
Yeah, Kim gave this really great example of like observing it with her mom. But yeah, you go on vacation with a family member and you're kind of immersed in their world, and you're like,
You got lots of free time.
And after you've kind of developed this point of awareness where you're like, oh, I see what this stuff is made out of now, you can see how she's influenced by worry and how her beliefs are shaping her life. And so that's the thing, is when you are doing this work, when you are learning German New Medicine, when you are learning the Ever Better Thought technology in the Resolve program or in the Ever Better Life course, when you're seeing behind the curtain, when you're seeing how you are creating your own experience, you start seeing how other people are creating their own experience, and then you are so much less influenced by their negative emotions, because you see exactly how they've created it. You say, oh, this perception, this belief that you have about yourself, the world, and other people causes you to see things in this way, causes you to see the body in this way, and because you see it in that way, it makes perfect sense that you're as scared as you are and you're as worried as you are, but that literally has no influence or power over me. I gave that advice to, someone I was talking to for a consult regarding, like going into the medical world, because, when you have a diagnosis, most people, by the time they find GNM, they've already been like through the ringer of all the different doctors, all the different, holistic and medical, and, they're using some measure of all of them. And so a lot of the people I work with are, they're going to the medical doctor, they're having the tests done, they're going, through, getting the reports back of like what the diagnosis technically is. And I think that's fine. And I think that's great, depending on the state of the individual. And it's like, if you can go through this process and you can understand that the doctor, the nurses, they're going to be treating you in a certain way based on their perception, based on their understanding. And so when you just understand that the information and the worldview, the paradigm from which they're working, is limited by the paradigm from which they're working. And so when you start to have all these different perceptions and you just start having access to different ways of seeing things. You can see things from their point of view. You can step into their world. You can step into their state, or you can stay in your state and just kind of view things. And that's where you, again, have the most power, because you have access to all of your resources. Because fear is leverage. And that's the thing, is whoever invokes the most fear in you tends to have the most power over you. And so that's why, medicine and churches, because what is the ultimate bad thing is death and then going to hell. And so it's like those two You know, they tend to have the most power over the most people because people are afraid. We're afraid. Here we are, little vulnerable like consciousnesses in these vulnerable bodies who like we need protection. And so we go to people who are powerful and they claim to have answers for us, and they use this fear as leverage over us and try to get us to do certain things, and it may be for our best interest or for our good, but it's like you've got to know that. You've got to know how fear is being leveraged over you and say, you know what? I realize that you're trying to make me afraid, and I know that you're doing that because you think it's for my best interest. You think that, you know, the fear of how bad it could be is going to get me to do something drastic that, you know, consciously, I don't think I really want to do that. And so when you're aware, when you've got access to all of your resources and all of your faculties, and because parts of your brain shut down when you're in fear, when you are, you know, anxious, you just go into full-on flight or fight mode. And in GNM, we know that that means just more conflict activity. That means more tissue that's going to have to be healed and repaired eventually down the road. And so that's why, like, you know, the thing about GNM is it's not that you, and this is like, people get confused about this. People like, they generalize, they say, oh, you know, like, oh, you just don't do anything then? And that's not it at all, you know, and that's not really the topic of this video specifically. This is just mostly about, you know, fear in other people. But the thing about GNM is it's not that you do nothing. You do very important things, the most important things, which is shifting your consciousness and maintaining states of peace, ease, well-being. I'm safe. I am, you know, my body is healing. That is not nothing. That is really the biggest thing, and that's the toughest thing for anybody to do, is to consciously shift from a state of worry and fear and anxiety to I'm safe, all is well, my body's healing, all is well. And so it's making those mental moves, making those mental shifts, learning how to control your own consciousness. It may sound simple, but it's something that is like a conscious effort every single day, because if you're not aware, if you're not conscious, you will get sucked down the path of fear, because that's where everybody goes.
Yeah, to me, it's like, I mean, this is the interesting thing too, because there are certain people that have the capacity to influence us more than others, and for a long time, I just sort of like, I let myself be influenced by those people. If it was the right person, they could influence me positively or negatively. Now I don't let anyone influence me negatively, right? Because I just a decision that I could make. I only allow people to influence me positively. And, you know, there's certain people who can influence me more positively than others, and that's okay. That's good. But it's like if you're driving down the interstate and you see a car and it looks like a car of someone that you know and you care about, a family member, something like that, and let's say it's kind of like, it's not like, you know, terribly crashed, but it's obviously stranded on the side of the road. You don't like whip your car off the interstate and crash the same way. You see what I'm saying? That's what it is to start worrying or freaking out. Well, but it's my mom. You know what I'm saying? Well, you know, maybe pull off and say, hey, what's going on? Are you okay? But don't like take your cues from them. Whatever they were doing got them stranded on the side of the road. You don't want to replicate their behavior. Maybe you can be of assistance to them if you can do so, say, without putting yourself in danger or without harming yourself. But you don't want to literally mirror what they're doing when what they're doing is obviously not working. And if a person's really freaked out or anxious or worried, especially if it's not manifesting in any meaningful action, right? So we're doing what we can. We've decided we're going to do this course of treatment, or we've decided we're going to go take this route. Now that we've made the decision about what we're going to do, let's sit around and worry about how we may have made the wrong decision or how it could go wrong and all this different stuff. It's very easy to do. It's very understandable why a person would do that if they're not really aware of what they're doing. But you express concern, right? How do I even know to do that? Well, there's a certain part of my brain that picks up on the fact that it's like, oh, mismatch between your internal state and mine. Let me kind of mirror your internal state so I can interact in a way that will likely be received by you. That's a useful thing, right? If we don't have that, I mean, we all know people who aren't particularly good at that, and they behave in ways that are kind of tone deaf. You know what I'm saying? They don't seem to pick up on those sort of subtle cues. The thing to watch out for, though, is mirroring unconsciously. So if I start mirroring the internal state of worry because someone else is worried about something, one thing I've noticed about myself is that I can sort of trick myself into feeling something that suggested mystic. If I then start to worry in response to your stuff, as soon as I'm worrying, that's my worry. And I'm going to look to my worry, and I'm going to use my worry as evidence that, in fact, there's something out here that's wrong. I'm going to completely overlook the fact that the only reason I started worrying was that I came into contact with somebody who wasn't really in a good state. As soon as I start creating that state myself, as soon as I start thinking from that state, I can't think in a better quality than the state from which I'm doing the thinking. And I think just recognizing that is a beautiful thing. You can be completely freaked out. You can be completely depressed. You can be completely sort of hopeless, feeling really hopeless, and just say, wow, hey, this is a state that I'm in. I'm in the attic. I'm in the basement. That's all. That's all this means. It doesn't mean anything about what's actually true. It doesn't mean anything about my capacity to inhabit other states or to think and feel from other states. It just means that this state exists and that I'm presently in it. And when you know that, there's just immense freedom. And you start to go, this is interesting. You start to kind of, maybe at first you don't know exactly how to exit the room. Have you ever been in a room where it's like, I'm trying to think, like in the grocery store.
I was thinking like Willy Wonka.
Yeah, well, even a less extreme example of that is like in the grocery store when like everyone's got fire escape on it and so you can't use it. You know what I mean?
Oh, right,
You're trying to figure out how to get out of an area of a building. Sometimes when you're in a state like anger or depression or anxiety or fear or whatever, it's like that. It's like you're looking around, you're conscious of the fact you're in the room. You know you don't want to be there. You're trying to leave, but I can't really find the door. But the thing is, you got into that state, right? And so there must be an entry point. Right? You don't get into things that don't have an entry point, right? Even if you had to make one, maybe you had to like blow a hole in the room to get into it, right? Still, there's an entry point there. Otherwise, you wouldn't be there. If you're in a state, there's a way out of it, just by definition. Because if you can get into it, you can get out of it. You just keep looking, let it be okay. You don't freak out that you're in, because then you're in a little room inside the room. So then you're freaked out inside the room of anxiety, because you were anxious at first because of your health thing, and then you got anxious because you realized you were in a state of anxiety, and it becomes this kind of like
and
Russian
then you know
doll.
that you're in conflict active mode, and you know it'll get worse if you stay there.
Yeah, and it's just an art of responding resourcefully to stuff. And it's like every state that I can get into, I can get out of, if I keep my wits about me and say, okay, I want to get out of here. What's the way out of here? And learning just to respond resourcefully to information. People being worried about you, people being freaked out, people criticizing you, people thinking that what you're doing for your health isn't right, people telling you that G&M is bad or that alternative stuff is bad or conventional medicine is bad for that matter. It's all just information. We're just surrounded. We are aware. They understand what you're going through. Does the fact that they love you mean that they have any idea what they're talking about? Not necessarily. And I think having access to that understanding, having options about that meaning and what you assign to it does the fact that somebody went to medical school mean that they know what's possible for you? There's not a class what's possible for you 101 in medical school. There's not. You learned a tremendous amount of information. Some of it's very useful. Some of it, maybe not. But the thing about that is, at no point in anyone's education as a healthcare provider did they learn what was or wasn't possible for you. They've learned a lot about what's happened in the past. They've learned a lot about statistics that have been compiled over the last 10 years. They've learned a lot about things that we haven't seen happen yet or things that haven't been documented. They learn a lot about stuff like that. But no one learns anything really about what's possible for you. And no one learns anything about how powerful the state of consciousness from which you're operating is in determining the degree to which you realize that which is possible for you. And I think, if you can remember that, you can turn on the news and watch it and be safe. You can go to the medical doctor and be safe. You know what I'm saying? You can go to the chiropractor and be safe, because whatever they say to you, if they say something to you that's kind of wacky or kind of like, not that resourceful, or even if they're giving you information that maybe you need to know, but they're giving it to you in a way that is not very, the bedside manner is lacking, right? The awareness of you as a conscious being is not really up to where it should be. If you have these skills, it's safe to go to those places, because if somebody says something stupid and it would have worried you in the past, you can just say, man, the guy's pretty educated, but it was pretty stupid of him to say that to me as a patient. I mean, what was he thinking? He needs to work on, this. He's not that great. It doesn't mean, oh shit, I thought everything was going to be fine, but now this guy with these degrees put an expiration stamp on me. Having that capacity and that ability is just tremendously powerful. And I think an awareness of the fact that what you become conscious of or what you assume to be true, that these assumptions harden into fact, and that you can't latch on to certain meanings or certain conclusions. You can't buy into certain beliefs without kind of signing your name to stuff, without basically putting your energetic creative capacity into the fruition, into the manifestation, into the realization of that stuff. Mm-hmm. And when you recognize that buying into, believing, assuming something, consenting to it by becoming conscious of it, when you recognize that that is a part of the creative act, you become much more reluctant to sign your names to things on the basis of other people's authority, whether it's your spouse or whoever, or a doctor or whoever it is. You sort of say, I don't know about that. I'm going to exercise my right to withhold a conclusion at this time and to see about what else might be possible for me. And when you start doing that, you start making very good decisions.
Yeah, I think, in the future, the knowledge of G&M is just going to radically transform the way people communicate. What you said just reminded me of another person I worked with a consult, and she was telling me before she knew about GNM, like when she got her initial diagnosis from, I think it was like a radiologist or someone, like the way they communicated with her, she said it was absolutely horrible. Like it was just full of so much fear about how bad everything was. And I mean, and again, from that person's perspective, I mean, that's their world. That's what they're immersed in.
Particularly radiologists. I don't know, like radiologists are a unique bunch of people. And I think
they like forget though that you're dealing with like a real person. And because they don't realize that communication and that emotional impact of a diagnosis, that in and of itself can be a conflict for a person. I mean, the domino effect of that communication is just, it can be so traumatic for the person. But if they knew that the information that they were transmitting, I even think about that with myself in my past in doing full-time chiropractic care and showing someone their x-rays. You know, I wanted them to understand how serious it was that their x-rays looked a certain way or that certain things were going on with their spine. But I realize now in retrospect that the way I communicated that could have induced so much fear in that person, could have made them have a self-devaluation conflict, had a death fright conflict, just depending on how, you know, intense I was feeling that day with my communication, you know. And my goal, again, because I didn't realize the power of that emotional impact of that communication, my goal was to get them to do behavior things. And that's what the goal of the medical doctor is, the radiologist. They want you to do certain things, and they believe that if you have a certain amount of fear, again, we're using that leverage of fear to get you to do things. Again, it's not because I was necessarily being malicious. Of course I was, and I love my patients. I wanted them to get well, but I believed that in order to get well, they had to do certain things that I prescribed to them, exercises, adjustments, you know, that they had to do those things in order to get well. And I felt like they wouldn't do the thing.
Aren't going to kill you, but your behaviors might. I mean, I think that was the whole thing. Mm-hmm. And this wasn't even like articulated. This is just fundamental to human beings and how we think. For the most part, we're very physically focused. We think that behaviors, that the bottom line is what you do or what you don't do. And so if you feel a little afraid and then you do the things that I think you need to do to be healthy, well, then that's fine with me, and I can have a good conscience about that, and everything's great. But when you recognize that the person's consciousness, that their emotional state is a part of their health and well-being. And in fact, I mean, in many senses, it's the acts on the nervous system by influencing the stuff that the nervous system does, what you're thinking about, how you're thinking about it, your emotional state, your experience, your perception, all of that different stuff. Like, if you look at the amount of movement information that the nervous system gets, and then you think about the amount of sensory data that the nervous system processes, it's processing a tremendous amount of sensory data. People who were pessimistic, I mean, you know what I'm saying, friends and family, and all this different stuff, and if teaching people how to relate and respond to that stuff is really tremendously powerful. And you can't see it, though. You know what I'm saying? Like, I can't see the 70,000 thoughts that you think every day. And so it's harder for me to take an interest in that unless I know how powerful and how important they are. I can look at your spine, I can show you a picture of it, and I can say, look how nasty this looks, or look how good this looks. You know what I'm saying? But I can't hold up a record of the 70,000 thoughts that you've thought so far today and say to you, look at this, that we really need to work on this. It's difficult to measure. And so people don't like to talk about things that are hard to talk about. But I think that it's very important. And when you spend the time to really equip people with the capacity to do the things that we're talking about doing, you really become, it's kind of like an artisan people cultivation business. It's like you can't mass produce this stuff, really. You have to spend time with people. You have to really interact with people. You have to show them this stuff, and then they go out and they do stuff, and you're like, well, and they say, is this right? And I say, well, I mean, that's pretty good, but what we're referring to really is this. How is what's going on with your consciousness right now? How do you make yourself the measure of all things? At some point, you've got to hear the things that we're saying and make it your own, so that you're not conforming to what we told you. You're conforming to an awareness of what it's like to be you that you arrived at as a result of us kind of pointing you in a direction. But at some point you come into ownership of this stuff, and it's not really about us anymore. I mean, you sort of remember that we taught you some things that led you in this direction, but there's this key critical threshold moment where it becomes yours. And when your consciousness becomes yours, when your experience becomes yours, when your feelings become yours, and your whole creative process becomes yours, then it doesn't matter what anybody else is doing. And it doesn't matter what you've been diagnosed with. And it doesn't matter what's going on or what's not going on or what's happening or not happening or has happened. You have kind of like dominion over this experience of what it's like to be you. And there's nothing that goes on outside that changes that fact. And when that becomes just kind of your reality, then it's effortless to do things in the way that's maximally resourceful. Then maximally resourceful really does just happen. It's a matter of getting to that place, though. And it's not just intellectual understanding. It's not just, okay, awareness, responsibility, choice, got it. You know what I'm saying? That's a start. But then you're also cultivating these experiential reference points. That's like one of the big things that we do in working with people, is like guiding you systematically through, here's some information, go do your life, go experience your experience, what it's like to be you, with this information in mind. Come back and tell me about it. Now we're going to talk about it. And then I want you to go back and I want you to do it again. It's a true mastery thing. It's learning to coordinate your consciousness. It's learning to, like, if you look at athletes, dancers, concert pianists, people who spend thousands of hours learning how to move the physical body. You know how easy it is to learn to move the physical body compared to learning how to move the consciousness? Because the consciousness, like what you're thinking about, what your awareness of being, is so much more ineffable. It's so much harder to see. It's so much more just kind of nebulous. It's there, but it's kind of hard to get a grip on it because it's not physical. Some time and effort goes into this stuff. You know what I'm saying? But the reward is so much more gratifying. I mean, you literally learn to move your physical body by learning to move your consciousness in these ways. And I mean, like, move your physical body across space, move your physical body and changing the stuff that's going on inside it. And that's why it's so worth the time. It's like such an investment, but it's such a deep thing. It's such a high-level thing that it trickles down to every area of life. And it takes a special kind of person to be willing to go this high up. But when you go this high up and you do work at the very top, it trickles down to everything. You know, if we go to your nutrition, then there's a certain, like, there's what it's like to be you, and your nutrition's like right here, or if you're a nutritionist, it's like up here. It's pretty high, but it's not at the top. And we change that stuff. Well, that trickles down beneath that. But your consciousness, your awareness of being, your self-concept, right? What it's like to be you, you're the essence of who you are, sits at the very top of everything. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying? And so if you're willing to climb up high enough to do work up there, the work that you do up there improves everything. It improves everything. It creates the changes that you want everywhere. Instead of fixing the bugs at the bottom end of the software, go up to the top and find out what's going on there that's causing all these problems in the first place. And you sort that out, and the fixes trickle down. And that's why I like doing this stuff. I think that's why we kind of gradually climbed up that ladder in terms of solving problems for people. And we found that self-concept is the top. When you start changing the self-concept, when you start making people conscious of being that which they want to be, the specific details of everything that exists underneath that sort themselves out, because you're not stupid, you're not broken, you're not wayward, you're not defective. So if we change the self-concept and we get the self-concept aligned with really what you want to be, who you want to be, how you want to be, everything starts to fall into place. And, you know, it's just an efficient way of doing things.
Yeah, and so that's why we fell in love with this kind of work. And the thing is, it's different about it. But I think for some people, why they're not aware of a space for it, because it's not a doing. Mm-hmm. You know, that's the thing, is you are a human being. We work with beingness. We used to work with doingness, you know, and the doings and the exercises and the adjustments and the nutrition. Those are doings. And like you said, the doings tend to take care of themselves when you fix the being. But the thing about fixing your being is, it's not a stop in here for 15 minutes, buy this food at the store, take these pills. It's not that quick fix, kind of simple, just do this. It's an integration of ideas and concepts. That's why we're on here all the time doing videos. That's why we have, an online course that we created, and we do calls and do deep dives and do, membership groups where we can kind of we got to try this stuff on. We got to figure out how it works, because, doing is easy. I mean, popping pills is easy and it doesn't take much time. That's why medical doctors, most type of practitioners that you see, except for psychotherapists and stuff that do spend an hour with you, most doctors don't have the time to spend with you that actually you would need to get this full depth of understanding. Who does? People, we want things fast, we want things fixed, we want things done so that we can move on to the next thing. But this is like a whole integration. This is like understanding yourself inside and out, how you've created your perceptions, how your body functions. And so it's just a different type of work.
Well, that's the thing. If people are too busy sometimes to do this, and I was this person. I'm in too much of a hurry. What am I hurrying off to, if not my own life? And that's what we're working on here, is fixing that life. I mean, your existence, your experience. And so that's the interesting thing. It's like, hurry up, I need to fix my experience so I can rush back to my experience. You know what I mean? It's like what you're rushing back to, that's the thing that we're working on. That the reason that for so many people, rushing is a way of life, because you always feel behind the curve, because part of your self-concept is never being good enough. Or how do you know that you've done enough? Well, I'm exhausted and I didn't even have time to eat lunch. That's how I know. That's like software glitches. That, you know, those are self-concept things that if you want to change them, they can be changed. And like, there's nothing, I mean, when you do your self-concept work, like when you start working on this stuff, when this becomes the most interesting thing to you, because you recognize that everything you care about flows from this. And it's not, let me fix my self-concept, okay, now I've got to rush off to the gym. It's not how it works, because, and this is a really interesting thing. People used to say to me all the time, I don't know how you do all the things you do in a day, because I have like a ton of exercises and things I really like to do, and all, and you know, productivity stuff. It's just fun for me. And I didn't always do this stuff, and I didn't will my way to it. I didn't adopt some kind of superhuman personality trait that made it look at me, look at everything I get done. The way that I did it was I stopped worrying about not doing enough. I stopped trying to do so much, and I started focusing on my awareness of my being. I started focusing on becoming conscious of already having done all the things that I wanted to do. And when I did that, instead of like trying to put every little behavior into place, I just flipped one switch and all of the behaviors got done. And that's how you do this stuff. Instead of fixing all of the individual problems, and you spend a whole lifetime, and people do this. They spend their whole lifetime fixing problems, and for every one that you fix, 3 more have sprung up, and you got to rush over to those. And it's like it's like there's a fire over here, and we spend our whole life in crisis management mode, not realizing that that is a manifestation of our self-concept, that we're creating the totality of that stuff. We're creating the crises without realizing it. We're creating our responses to it. We're interacting. We're sowing the seeds of future things. We are building a way of life without realizing that's what we're doing, because we don't realize what we're doing, because we're not conscious of what we're doing, because we're not paying attention to it, especially what we're conscious of being. And when you recognize that that's it, it's like what I am conscious of being, right now will be my behaviors, will be the situations that come up for me, will be my reactions or my responses to those situations, will be the situations that I create in response to that. And when you stop trying to solve problems and you start really optimizing the self-concept, you start really figuring out how you work, the other stuff just takes care of itself. You have personal experiences about how this works. You do things without realizing you're doing them. You do things effortlessly. You do things that normally it takes you forever to do. You just bam them out in a short period of time. How does that happen? How can we make that happen more frequently? How can we make your best days just the way your days go? How can we make that the new normal for you? Everybody who's ever felt bad has had a day where they felt less bad than they do on average. You know what I'm saying? Like, everyone has had a day where they felt better than they ever felt at any other point. If you can do it once, you can do it again. And it's self-concept work. It really is. You become what you're conscious of being. And you don't know exactly how it happens. There are all these kind of mysterious ways that you don't know about. And you don't need to know about that stuff. You just need to understand the connection between your self-concept and the results that you get in your life, the person that you become. And when you stop kind of perseverating on, and you stop kind of getting hung up on who you are, and if I'm really upset about who I am, or where I am, or what I am, or what's going on with my health, I become very conscious of those things, my health problems, my issues, my defects, my faults, my flaws. I become very conscious of those things, and to the degree that I'm conscious of those things, I become those things more and more and more. And then I look at it and say, "Oh, see, I knew it. See, I knew the reason I was so conscious of being these things is because I really am those things." No, the reason I really am those things is because I've spent so much time being conscious of being them. When you just kind of start ignoring that stuff, I call it a benign neglect. Like, like when you plant a seed in the ground. You do something called benign neglect. You don't dig the seed up every 5 minutes and say, "Hey, how you doing? Can I get you anything?" Periodically you water it, you do these things like that. But for the most part, you put a seed in the ground, you leave it alone. Same thing works with self-concept. You monitor, you just now, here and now, become who you want to be. Assume that you're already it. Practice that. You know what I'm saying? Like, let your consciousness be the soil and plant the seed of the awareness of already being that which you want to be inside the soil of your consciousness, and leave it there. You know what I'm saying? Don't dig it up. Someone else comes along and they say something, and you say, "Oh boy, I better dig that seed of awareness up." No, leave it in there and let it manifest. Let it sort of start trickling out. Don't watch for it to happen. You know what I'm saying? Like watching grass grow, watching paint dry. It'll take 1,000,000 years if you look at it. You know what I'm saying? Because you're so conscious of it not growing. You're so conscious of it not drying. But if you just plant it and leave it there and just let it be, you'll become that thing. But you can't wait for the crops to grow to plant the seed. You know what I'm saying? You can't wait to be what you want to be before becoming conscious of being it. You have to plant the seed first in any area of life that you want. And once you figure it out, though, oh, it's so easy. It's so easy.
Yep. And so that is it for tonight. Thank you guys so much for joining us. I'm sorry, I know the one video was freezing. After we finish, I think the upload should have the full video. It will also be on YouTube. So this coming week, we are doing an awareness challenge. So tune into our videos each night for a little bit of an exercise that's going to walk you through more of the self-concept work and stuff that you can do to start expanding your awareness, start understanding where your experience is coming from, so that you can, decrease fear and increase all of the things that you are looking to create in your life. And then as always, if you need any help, if you're interested in joining one of our programs, the Resolve membership community, the Ever Better Life course, doing any kind of personal work with us, please send us a message. Let us know what you need, what you are looking for, and we are here to help you. So we love you and have a great night.